I am Bob Cooney. We are live today with a very special edition of the Being Virtual Show. We're live streaming to, I don't know, 3 Facebook pages, Twitter versus Periscope, to Twitch, and on my website at bobcooney.com and beingvirtual.tv. And I am here with Peter Csathy. Say hi, Peter.
Hey, Bob. It's good to be here.
It's great to have you. So Peter is one of the people that I follow for insights in digital media. He's been in the industry for a long time. I'm going to let you tell a little bit about your background for my audience, who probably, because I'm not sure how much of our intersections have crossed over, at least until recently on social media.
Got it. Yeah, no, happy to do it. I'll keep it really brief. So I've been in the media and entertainment and tech world for about 30 years, and I've worn just about every hat as you can imagine. Started off as an entertainment lawyer. Don't hold that against me. Then I moved into the studios like Universal, New Line, became a business exec, doing a lot of international business deals, transactions. Then I became a serial entrepreneur. I built and ran and sold a number of digital media companies in video and music. And then for the past several years, I've been more of an advisor, a connector, a deal guy. And I also do, a fair amount of writing and thought leadership.
Yeah, well, you've been somebody, as I've said, follow Peter. You've got a website, creative.media.
Correct, that's it.
You have a book you've just released. Talk about that.
I do. Yeah, I do. I have a new book that in the madness of the pandemic, as we were all locked down, because I barely sleep as it is, I just decided to write a book. And I wrote a book that I published just a couple of weeks ago, so it's very fresh, called Viral Media, Entertainment in the Age of the Great Pandemic. And it covers all sectors of the media and entertainment business, essentially: video, music, immersive, esports, live, experiential. And not only talks about the way of the business today, but also going out into this decade and then beyond that. And if anybody's interested, what I'm doing is my own small gestures. I'm making it available for free to people, so PDF format. So if anybody's interested, you can just go to my website, send me a note via the contact list, and you'll get the book.
Yeah, and I highly recommend it, by the way, because there's some great thinking in there. And we're going to dive into some of that on this show. And so I'm going to start out with something that I've been writing and talking a lot about. And I feel like there were 2 big stories in the last week in kind of the media entertainment space. And one of them was the theater wars.
Yeah.
And what's happening with, the movie studios versus the theaters and the exclusive distribution window, and how that's going to play out in the future of location-based entertainment, which theaters are a big part of. So what's your take on that? And how do you think that's going to play out?
Well, you're right. It is the big story. It's really probably one of the, if not the headline of the changes in the media and entertainment world during the pandemic. So what changed things was, obviously, movie theaters are completely shut down. So Hollywood studios that have produced these big budget films, all of these movies, they either had a choice of either just waiting and shelving those movies until theaters reopened, or making them available on day one now, instead of in movie theaters, but in your homes. And Trolls World Tour from Universal Studios is the one that really broke this logjam, because it's something the studios wanted to do for a long time. And just really quickly, windowing, for those of you who don't know what that term is, windowing has been a decades-long phenomenon in the media and entertainment, in the world of Hollywood and movies. So what that means is that the theatrical window theatrical got the major films day one. And then they were held back from in-home distribution, originally when it was DVDs, things like that, but now for on-demand streaming, on-demand purchase, all of that for about 3 months. That was kind of the window and how things have evolved. And movie theaters fought the studios tooth and nail to try to change that and experiment with what they call day and date release in home. So you would release the film on the same day in home, make it available for streaming on the same date that it was day one in the movie theater.
But they only did that with like these little niche movies that nobody heard about, had no marketing budget behind them, and nobody other than the mother of the director wanted to see, right?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. But one interesting thing Netflix and Amazon, they started making quote unquote films. Obviously, like what does a movie mean anymore when you have television platforms like this? But they started making their big budget feature films and making them available on their platforms first. And so that already upset the theater owners. So there was a lot of debate about all this. And again, now the pandemic and the fact that we're locked in together in this collective quarantine really forced the issue and gave the studios the opportunity.
The moral high ground, I would call it, right?
Yeah, the moral high ground, the opportunity for the first time to really to do this experiment and feel like they could defend it because they had no place else to put the product.
And so Trolls does $100 million in 3 weeks.
Right.
And then Warner Brothers says, hey, we're going to dip our toe in the water with Scoob, and we'll see how that does in the next couple of weeks. And so, but everybody's still saying, the theaters are still saying, oh, the big tent poles, and you've even said this, the tent poles, and describe what a tent pole is. Like, so the big movies, right?
Right. So just one quick note about the economics of it, because I think this is interesting too, and then I'll get into the tent poles and what I see happening there. The typical split when a movie is in the theaters, over time it roughly goes to about 50% to the studio owner, 50% to the movie theaters. So that
declines over time. Like as the movie gets older, it goes down, right?
Completely. So it's above 50% to the studio in the early weeks. So if there's a $200 million grossing film, the studio just very roughly gets $100 million of that. Okay. So when you do the in-home distribution, it's an 80-20 split. 80% goes to the studio. So here's the way the math works. The original Trolls grossed about $150 million domestically. Given the split, it was about $75 million, $80 million to the studio. Well, Trolls in its first 3 weeks reportedly has grossed $100 million in-home distribution. So if you look at the 80-20 rule, $80 million goes back to the studio. So already it's roughly the same. Yeah. So the economics are interesting. This is the way I see it playing out. I do believe that the genie is out of the bottle. So now that this has happened, studios are going to follow along. Kind of like when the pandemic, cities are opening up. And so it's hard for other cities not to open up. I see that the family-friendly films like Trolls, where you have younger kids and parents who need to find babysitters and all that, which gets expensive, they've been looking for this in-home release from the very beginning. Now there will be more.
People will spend an unlimited amount of money entertaining their kids. Like, that's well known, right? We'll spend whatever you want. Here's your money, kid, right?
Completely. There's no question. That's why Disney Plus does so well, by the way. Yeah. No question about it. And so I think that the family-friendly films, you'll see a lot more of those being released at home, like Trolls. Then I think that you'll see this was already the trend for older people like me, where you have more adult fare, less family kiddie movies. Those were already kind of being squeezed out of the movie theaters already. So indie films. So you'll see more, that was already a trend and that was already happening. But I think the teenagers, and to your point, like the tentpole movies, and the tentpole movies are the big, like superhero movies, the Marvel movies, the Star Wars movies, those franchise films that really are those are the ones that generate all the money for the studios. Those are largely driven by teens, and teens and early, young people. Those tentpole movies, they're events, and events will not go away, and events want to be held out of home into big places where people can congregate, and they will congregate again. I am optimistic about that. So that's the way I see this playing out.
So I have another theory.
Okay.
And I want to ask you about this. So large pay-per-view events, specifically around MMA and boxing, have been taking in big 9-figure hauls, right? And most recently, Mayweather against McGregor did $700 million in one night.
Right.
So do you see Disney, right, doing Star Wars at $100 for the first showing and doing $500 million or $1 billion in revenue in one showing direct to video? Because you only need a couple of million people you know, a million people to drop a couple of $100. Like, it's a big. Is that going to happen, or is that just too risky for them, or am I just looking too far in the future? Am I crazy?
No, well, I think your point. Listen, it's experimentation time, and it'd be foolish not to experiment. Now, when you put that kind of money behind a film like a Star Wars, it's obviously a massive risk to change the game, change the business model. But there's no question what you just said, like that example, I believe could be massively successful for sure, because it's an event in and of itself. It's newsworthy that you're doing this for the first time. So I think
and would the theaters, would AMC have the balls to block Star Wars?
Well, look, this is where if you start blocking those kind of films, then you start blocking your own opportunity, and they're already challenged in so many different ways. Here's the thing. I think that at the end of the day, what's happening, and already happened pre-pandemic, it's just being accelerated, that rules want to be broken. That there's flexibility, and experimentation is the way to go. And just because certain business models, and I'm not saying this lightly, but just because business models have been in place for decades doesn't mean that they should be the ones going forward. And you're seeing, so I think that your example is brave experimentation. And ultimately, there may be ways for theaters to do things differently than they're doing, and not just look at their economics the way they are. Yeah. So as an example, like the movie pass, if we remember, $9.99 a month for unlimited, the theaters still got fully paid, by the way. The economics didn't work for Movie Pass, but they were great. People went into the theaters and they bought a lot of popcorn, and a lot of money was exchanged that way. So it's just a question of how can the economics be changed? And this is something that you may have read that I've written, that it wouldn't surprise me that even though a Movie Pass doesn't work as a standalone independent business, as part of something bigger, strategically bigger, like a Netflix or an Amazon, can you imagine that if you had Netflix, a super premium Netflix that's at $20 a month, I don't know, or as part of Amazon Prime, you get another benefit where you get unlimited theaters going into theaters, that could be really good for the movie theater business.
Will we see, Jeff Bezos bought Whole Foods.
Yeah.
Does he come in and buy AMC theaters?
Yeah, this is something that I've written about this before, where I think that that would be a perfect example as a strategic move for Amazon, because Amazon takes a 360 view of customer engagement. They're brilliant this way. So they were virtual completely, but then they were doing things that were boggling people's minds by buying Whole Foods, building all of these retail shops as malls were closing down. Now, right now it's tough, but they will come back. And so I do believe, for all kinds of strategic reasons, that Amazon's looking at movie theaters, yes.
Now, Adam Frisk just posted, he says, team optimism here. People will go out again. And we're already seeing that. So there was a mall, somebody posted a video on Facebook that I saw this morning of a mall opening in Georgia, and the line, people spaced out every 6 feet, but the line was around the block to get into the mall when it opened. And so people are going to go out again. There's no doubt about that. They're going to want to be entertained. I think the business models are what's really in question.
Yeah, no, look, this is something that's actually really near and dear to my heart. And so even in my book, you see the discussion, but I close my book with chapters about humanity and about the human need for people to get away from just looking down all the time and getting out into the real world, interacting, live experiences that are lasting. And I lived that life myself with my family, and it's made all the difference. And I absolutely believe that. I absolutely believe that there's a human need to and a lot of us are going crazy lockdown because we have this human need to get out and rub shoulders and interact with one another and have communal storytelling from the beginnings of time. It's been communal storytelling.
Yeah. Now you talked about theaters needing to do things differently. And so there's this 4D technology that's been out now for about 10 years, right? And it's picking up steam in other countries. But here in America, there's only a few dozen of these 4D theaters that have wind and motion and smell and all of these effects. Why hasn't that been adopted more widespread by theaters in the U.S. And do you see that as a maybe potentially a growing trend?
I certainly believe that theater experiences will be reimagined, and it will go beyond reclining leather seats and sushi and things like that. I think it, but I don't, first of all the cost and complexity associated with that, I think that there's just been cost factors. But I also believe that the way I see it, that's somewhat gimmicky. Whereas what I think is more, what I see happening more is kind of like what Disney, just before the pandemic hit, Disney announced a new partnership with Secret Cinema. And Secret Cinema is a company that has full experiences. So you have a show, but you also have the theater, the screening, but you also have a pre-show and you have a post-show, and you make it kind of an event. So instead of going to an hour-and-a-half movie, it becomes a 3-hour evening event. And I think that there's going to be more reinvention that way, where you have a full-on experience, kind of like going to a music festival. It's a music and arts festival like Coachella is, where it's just something that cannot be remotely replicated at home.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So Coachella, by the way, if you haven't watched the Making of Coachella documentary on YouTube, check it out. It's fascinating.
It is.
It shocked me at how many of those things I was there for. And one of them was I was right up front for the Tupac hologram, right?
Yeah.
And with Dre and Snoop. And now there's been, so let's talk about holograms, avatars, because that's something you talk about as synthetic beings and synthetic humans.
Yeah.
There's a big intersection there between that and music. What's happening in that space, and where does that go?
Well, I certainly think, look, on the music side, I know a number of companies that own rights, like publishing rights and master rights for some of the, many of the most well-known artists that have passed. And so there have been tours that have been scheduled, virtual tours that have been scheduled, and it's there's early fascination with them, but there's also a lot of resistance from people who think that that's blasphemy to be doing something like that. I do think that as the technology gets stronger and stronger, this virtual presence, whether you are somebody who passed away or not, virtual presence is going to be something that's a very significant opportunity. So it's going to be in music, but also think of conferences or musicians who are, right now, let's talk about musicians for a moment. Touring is the primary mode of financing their lives and their creative works, and completely shut down now. So now there's a scramble for artists of every size, by the way, not just the indies and the small guys. Everybody's trying to figure out, okay, my portfolio's down if I have a portfolio. I'm not able to collect money. What can I do now? Well, so there's a lot of experimentation with live streaming. That's great. But imagine where you're able to do things that are, if you're able to be, instead of touring where you go to one show every day or every 3 days, now you can be in 10 places in the same day. I can be with you, being interviewed with you. I can pop in at a conference and sing a song. I can, give a little spiel at someplace else. So I can be in all these different places, and I can charge money each time. I think that's really, really interesting. So virtual presence that way. And then there gets to be things like that you really are very deep in. There's a really interesting company called Red Pill VR. I'm not sure if you're familiar. Like Red Pill, what they're doing, I think is very cool, and I've demoed it, where you can be from your home through virtual reality. You can be with Diplo and interacting with Diplo, who's far, far away, but he's actually live. He's DJing live himself from wherever he is, and your friends can join you from wherever they are, and you're dancing together and interacting together.
In VR, like literally in an immersive 3D environment. That's the thing that's amazing with what they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. You're interacting. You can be right on stage with Diplo. And by the way, it's not like it's just avatars that are kind of interacting. You're able to communicate live with Diplo. And there's all kinds of possibilities. Can you imagine just one wacky one? I saw this film that was on Amazon. What was it called? It was about live streaming amongst Chinese influencers in this culture that's out there where these influencers are live streaming and almost like begging their followers to pay them money, pay them money, pay them money. And some of these followers are paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to be noticed, just so their names get up or they get a shout out from the influencer. And it's fascinating. So you can imagine that there are different ways to monetize in not so blatant ways, but by special recognition, because everybody wants to be recognized.
Yeah, everybody wants to be seen. And it's fascinating. The statistics on how much money people pay, I read that there's, on average, gamers spend $120 a month paying donations to live streamers.
Yeah.
Like because you talk about how much money is there for the streaming wars. We're talking about nickels and dimes compared to how much people are paying to streamers just on Discord and on Twitch and YouTube. It's shocking to me that, and Patreon is another platform that people use just to make these donations. It's
completely, it's the whole free to play gaming model, which is going to be entering into the music world. TikTok's already starting to do that, I think, and then you have some other companies that are doing that. China-based company, I forgot the name of the streaming company, but that does a lot of that kind of micro-transactional stuff. And we've seen it in the gaming side, just like you said, where people don't want to pay to try something, but once they're in the moment, once they're in the experience, it's pretty amazing how you make it easy to just, okay, contribute, buy this, like merch, special merch, if there's a timer on it, then money will flow. And then, and I don't want to sound so commercial about it either. Like Patreon and some of these platforms, as you said, like Patreon's purpose is you go in because you, as a consumer or as a fan, because you love this artist, you want to enable them to have a career in their art. Yeah. And so you're a patron of them. You're happy to invest in them. Yeah. And I think music is a special area that way.
Yeah, and so I got a couple of questions coming in. So David, who I think is up in Toronto, is saying, with contents going digital, and this is your wheelhouse, being a recovering attorney, as I referred to you. With content going digital on day one, what about copyright and people downloading it for free with torrents, and how is all of that playing out? Because let's just stop there and let you answer the question.
Yeah, well, certainly some copyright has been, I hate to say relaxed, but for lack of a better word, and I'll give you some specific examples about how that does. So first of all, I guess the owners of IP. Ultimately, IP ownership, everything flows from that. Everything flows from that. So those who own the IP, the rights, the creators, they're the ones who I always believe are in the control seat. So what's the best thing to do about it? The old days, and when I was president of a company called Music Match, we were a legitimate streaming service competing against the bad Napster. That was when bad Napster was here. And so the old days was just litigate the bad guys out of existence, and that didn't work. Well, over time, there's been a realization that, a slow one, that as new technologies come online, putting your head in the sand and just fighting it is not going to be the answer. So how do you find a way to take that new technology, that new service, and leverage it to your benefit? So copyright has not necessarily been relaxed, but there's been a more innovative, realistic, and smart view by the copyright owners and the owners to play ball with people who are creating new ways to engage, because ultimately content, if it has new ways to engage, new ways to find you, that is all monetizable. That's a good thing. Like, that's a wonderful thing. If you can get your art out there, that's a great thing. So a couple really interesting examples that there. TikTok is an example. So TikTok is massive. A year ago in the United States, it wasn't, by the way. And I know this because I have a 20-year-old kid and a 17-year-old kid. And a year ago, they were sneering at TikTok. They were like, pfft. And then TikTok really took off and is not just about music anymore. But they must have blanket licenses. I'm sure they do. And now the music guys, the labels, they're craving to work with them because of the audience. A fascinating one is Walt Disney Company. Walt Disney is probably the most controlling of its IP than any company out there, yeah. Right? But they did an interesting experiment with the movie Frozen. For the first time with Frozen, they allowed the songs themselves to be just out there and used by my kids, your kids, everybody's kids to create videos on YouTube and whatever. And they didn't fight them. They didn't ask YouTube to take them down. They allowed it to happen. So everybody, and ultimately what that led Frozen to, that's known as the reason why Frozen became the massive hit it was, is because all of us and our kids became the greatest marketers for them.
Yeah, so they embraced user-generated content in a way that drove awareness. Yeah, brilliant.
So I don't know if that was it must have been an intentional strategy at the time, but it worked. But it was a fundamental shift in Disney's own thinking, and that shows you how now copyright owners, at least the smart ones, are looking at the world.
All right, so that takes us to the next, what I thought was actually the biggest news in media last week, that didn't quite get the coverage that the theater wars did, but Travis Scott in Fortnite. Now, did you have a chance to see it?
I actually didn't see that one.
So what happened was, so Travis Scott, one of the biggest rap artists in the world now, did a deal with Fortnite, and he showed up live. Well, not live, recorded, but basically they turned off all the fighting, so you couldn't kill each other, and he did this next level performance in Fortnite where he was this bigger than life character. And you would and he went from scene to scene to scene. So they did 5 scene wardrobe changes in about a 10-minute show. And it was a bit of almost like a medley of his big hits. And then he used that to launch a new collaboration and a new wardrobe. And there were 27 million live views over 5 shows in different time zones. And I watched it and I was speechless, which never happens to me.
Well, so it sounds like I didn't see it. I'd heard a little bit of it, but I didn't see it. But it sounds like it took a year ago. Remember, there was the big Fortnite experience with Marshmallow, but it sounds like it took it to a whole new level.
Yeah, it took it to the next level. And what I was like, when this happens in VR, that's the game changer, because that when you combine the production value and the fact that this is something that you can't imagine, it was hard to imagine, really. It was really psychedelic, and you take that with a sense of real presence. It's going to be interesting to see where they go. And so my question is really about, there's talk about Fortnite building the Metaverse.
Yeah.
And for those of you that don't know what the Metaverse is, it was, what was the book? Snow Crash? William Gibson's Snow Crash. And he talked about this, this virtual world. I think the more recent version of that would be the Oasis in Ready Player One. And there's talk about Fortnite is actually, or Epic Games is actually building that in Fortnite now. And a place where we live virtually. And they just Friday, I think it was, they announced Fortnite Party, which is a place, an island you can hang out and there's no weapons. You can shoot each other with plungers and stuff.
Right.
Where people can hang out in this other world, the fourth place. What do you see happening in this kind of virtual world landscape? Because there's a lot of companies that are playing around in that.
Well, look, I think that so the concept there of the metaverse, what was it? Second Life. Second Life really, I think, kind of started the ball on that so long ago, really ahead of its time, although it killed it even back then. All these, first from a content owner's, a creator's perspective, I think the lesson there, with Travis Scott and his representatives, is good on them for looking at the world and really thinking out of the box in terms of, okay, I've heard about this Marshmallow thing. What can we do? What other sorts of platforms are? Being very entrepreneurial. So I think a lesson to all creators is look at there are so many different ways to interact and engage. Play with them, experiment with them. And so that's one thing. What you mentioned, and the 2-pack thing with the hologram, and the Red Pill VR thing where you can be with the DJs and you can interact with your friends, and it's not just like a video game. You actually, like I said, I've tried it and it blew my mind. It blew my mind. And I was just there with people or avatars I didn't know, and I was still like couldn't believe it. And I'm a guy who likes going to music festivals, so I've been in and I still go to, maybe I shouldn't, but I still do go to the Sahara tent every year, and I love it at Coachella. So I'm right in there, and I felt like I was on something like that. The idea, I believe that there's a place for all of it. So there could be times when you want you need the live, you need the Bob Cooney in the room with you, shaking hands, and we will shake hands again. But you want the Emily Hames, who's the lead singer for Metric, who live streams all the time. She's really savvy that way. But you're going to want to see her in the round. You're going to want to see the band, and you're going to want to feel it in a different kind of way. But then there are many times when, let's say, you can't go to Coachella or you can't go to that concert, where you will be able to experience it virtually. And the obvious thing is live streaming, and live streaming is not just what we're doing here. There's all kinds of whistles and bells that can be added to that. But then there's more than the two-dimensional, then it's the three-dimensional, the four-dimensional. So I think that there's a place for all of it. And just back on the music side, or even on a franchise side like a Star Wars, if you're a super fan, I think you're going to be wanting to engage in all of it. Just like the artist is going to want to experiment with it, you as a fan are going to want to experiment with it, because you have different moods, you have different whatevers. And so ultimately, I'm a long-term optimist about creativity. I think that all the new platforms, all the new technologies, the beauty of it is it gives you a new opportunity to express your craft. I mean, here's another thing, and I'm sorry, but I get passionate about this stuff. But when you talk about, like in the video side, before we had the streaming services and before we had smartphones and all that, and cable packages and all that, we were locked into 22-minute sitcoms, essentially 30-minute sitcoms, 22 minutes of content, 8 minutes. And so we had all these formats that we were locked into, which stifled creativity. Things were much more formulaic. Well, the beauty of all these different platforms is that the rules are off. The handcuffs are off. You can experiment any ways you want, and that's why you see things like Game of Thrones. They kill off characters. They killed off the lead actors in the first three episodes. Like, that never would have happened.
Or Quibi, which is a whole platform for 6-minute short form video, which launched at the worst possible time.
Yeah. Well, that's true. But exactly right. And those are just a few examples. But so you have all these different ways for creators to create. And no matter if you're a big time Martin Scorsese type, then play with the smaller things and just experiment. And it's just a different form of craft. Yeah. So if you're in all these different dimensions, I'll bring it back as best I can for myself, is that just different platforms are different ways to tell a story. And so if you try to bring something that you put on video and try to just translate that to a fourth dimensional sort of experience, it's not going to work. You have to look at the platform, but the core IP, so the character, the central storyline can be carried through it. So like from my standpoint, the holy grail is if you're able to tell a story that goes from this to this to this to this and almost like comes full circle, including out of home. Yeah, I think that's huge.
Yeah. So somebody was asking a question, and I suspect it might be Heather Blair, that about esports in theaters. And so let's talk about esports first.
Okay.
What's happening there? Because we're seeing this crossover between real athletes now that sports are shut down, professional sports. And I'm sorry, that was terrible. I don't mean that esports athletes aren't real athletes. Kylie's son is a CS:GO player. He's playing Valorant now, and he trains, it's a real thing. And so that was not intended as the diss that it sounded like. But traditional athletes that are playing professional sports are now crossing over to gaming.
Yes.
What impact is that going to have on esports, if any, and how do you view esports, just growing into the future?
Yeah, well, look, esports already, I think for many, is shockingly already over $1 billion business and is expected to double. Well, even before the pandemic, was expected to double in the next couple of years. And so I recently sat down with Meg Whitman, Meg Whitman from the Silicon Valley Giant, who's the co-founder with Katzenberg at Quibi. And I was talking to her about Quibi, and she out of the blue said, "I've never seen anything like esports. And I've seen a lot of things. I've never seen anything go straight up before. Straight up. So esports was already on a tear and is here to stay. It is not a fad. What you said about being real athletes, whatever you call them, athletes, the athletes for a lack of a better word, but absolutely they're skilled players, just like golf, they're skilled players, like driving, they're skilled players. And brands are beginning to recognize that now have invested a lot of money in them. So that's only going to increase already. The pandemic, where we're at home, more and more people, not just the existing gamers and those who are watching esports, more and more people are now exposed to it. And so that naturally, at least in my view, is going to accelerate what was already going straight up, is going to go up even further, fast, yes, really straight, faster adoption. And then another big kicker on this, more fuel to that fire, is that 5G is coming out, which will reduce latency, improve quality of the experience so much more. And so and then cloud-based gaming and all kinds of things. So you're going to see all of this where it's going to just accelerate this industry, which is already significantly challenging traditional sports. Yeah. So the big trick, and I love sport. Look, I love traditional sports, but the big trick is for the more traditional players, like whether it's the NFL, Major League Baseball, and all those, and NBA, is to try to capture the fancy of the younger generation who are digital natives, right? And so that's why you see more crossover of the traditional athletes coming into the esports world. And that too is accelerating now because the athletes can't be outside. So they are now more open to understanding that this is where a big part of their audience has gone.
Yeah, and I think that the location-based part of that's working are obviously in the big events, like I was just watching the replay last night of the Fortnite World Championship, which was at Arthur Ashe Stadium in Flushing Meadows, which is where I grew up. And there were I don't know how many 30,000 people watching live, and the 16-year-old kid won $3 million coming in first place. And I watched an interview with him on the Jimmy Fallon show the next night, and just to show the disconnect between the audiences, Jimmy Fallon didn't even know what questions to ask. He didn't know how to interview this kid because he had no idea what esports was, and it was actually a bit embarrassing for me because he was making jokes about, well, what do your parents think about you playing video games all day, like that type of thing. Like, the kid just won $3 million. I'm sure his parents were quite supportive.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
But there seems to be a disconnect in audiences and based on generations, which, welcome to life and parenthood. But
yes.
I wonder if this crossover between, with traditional sports athletes now playing video games on television is going to open that up to more people our age that are kind of a bit out of touch with what's happening in esports.
Yeah, I think absolutely. So first of all, bad on Jimmy. I like Jimmy Fallon.
He's awesome.
He's hilarious. He's hilarious, and he seems like such a great guy. And maybe he was just playing that part, of the elder statesman who doesn't know what's going on. But there's no question. I think that first of all, anybody who's out there who doesn't know much about esports, that is a big part of the industry and of the overall media and entertainment world now. And what you said about some of the traditional people being more exposed to esports now because they're locked in.
They have nothing else to do.
Yeah, exactly. That certainly will speed things up, and it's going to be a big realization and an understanding of how impactful that can be. And also, that's for the brands too. So more resources will be put into it. But the big opportunity there's a theme here, I think, of continuity, of 360-ishness, of bringing things together, where it's not a one-way street. like the real way to think about it is that it's smart also, not just for you to be smarter and understand that audience, you'll know more about that. But the younger, let's say those who are more tied into esports, so the younger generation, and may not be following the NBA or some of the more traditional sports, if the personalities become relatable, the traditional sports personalities become relatable to them, and they understand them and they begin to like them, maybe then they will also gravitate more toward NFL content and this and that. And so get out into that kind of more traditional sports. And then the big win can be tying it all together. So you don't have to just have a 16-week season, regular season for the NFL. Maybe you can continue the engagement beyond the NFL network and have an NFL esports-ish sort of continuity thing. Yeah. So like if you're an IP owner, this gets back to the core. I really think this is kind of like the core. If you're an IP owner, you own content, you're a creator, whatever it may be. It may be a sports league, it may be a brand, maybe Star Wars, maybe anything. That sits at the center of or an athlete or a musician. That sits at the center of the universe. Then you look at all the different ways you can engage with people. Like, that's exciting. And so esports is another area.
And you might have just hit on one of the opportunities for theaters. Like, I think about AMC with, 8,000 auditoriums, most of which now are, they're all shuttered, but how many of them are going to be useful in the future? The question, I think, from Heather was this intersection between theaters and esports, because they're all trying to figure out what's the location-based strategy for esports. This 360 experience that you're talking about and connecting with fans, maybe even on a local basis, creating these smaller local esports tournaments and maybe having athletes come in their hometown, to be able to connect more with fans around playing these games, not in an auditorium with a real basketball, but playing NBA Jam or something like that on a screen, but in front of an auditorium of fans who might be willing to pay $50, $60, $70 to be one of 100 people to watch that game live. I think you might have hit on something there that'll be interesting, because Cinépolis, which is one of the big theater chains in Latin America, they've actually spun off a location-based esports startup, and I think they have 7, 8, 9 locations now in Mexico. And Cineplex out of Canada owns the Virtual Athletic League, I believe, and they run esports events on college campuses. And it used to be Virgin Gaming, and they acquired it a few years ago. And so we're seeing theater companies play around in esports, and I think at some point we're going to see it converge. I'm not quite clear about how. I don't think they're clear about how it's going to happen either, but this is going to accelerate that.
Yeah, I agree. And the way I think about it is kind of getting back to the destination thing for theater owners. Like the idea of owning venues, that's powerful, because then it's a question of, well, the choices that have been used have been limited by thinking, well, they're just for movies, right? But these are venues that can host a wide array of content, of different experiences. So it could be an esports thing where if you're creative, then you can do, like, imagine what you just said. You have the League of Legends and the tournaments in a big stadium, but you could have mini tournaments, because not everybody can afford that, go out there. But yet, like you said, you can connect with other people who are like-minded in your community, and you want to be able to share that experience. At least some people will. Yeah. And then if you're a faker, and I'm no expert in all the different e-fleets out there, but Faker I know is one of the big ones who makes millions of dollars. Tie in some of the other threads that we've been talking about, Bob, where like you can appear at multiple different of those venues live via hologram, and you cannot, and it's not going to be some canned thing. You can actually interact with people, answer questions, things like that. Yeah. And there's and then you can sell merchandise, and it's all kinds.
I was corrected by somebody, and you're absolutely right. It's not Cinépolis, it's Cinemex. That actually is doing the esports thing down in Mexico. Cinépolis is doing some stuff with Free Roam VR, but not the esports stuff. So I got those confused. Thanks for that correction. Now, so we keep coming back to holograms, right? And so, do you see? I was talking to somebody from Deutsche Telekom. I can't remember his. Terry Schussler from Deutsche Telekom recently, and he was talking about holographic capture, coming to the new iPad and the new iPhone with these LiDAR scanners that are coming out. Do you see, this is more of a technology question, but do you see, he thought we'd have holographic capture in our homes soon, and the ability to create that real holographic virtual telepresence. And I feel like if that happens, then it's kind of game on for all of this stuff.
Well, okay, so first of all, that's well beyond my pay grade, Tim. When it comes to the depth of holographic technology, I'm not an engineer or anything like that. But from a opportunity perspective, there's no doubt that there will be the idea of capturing the images or capturing yourself holographically and being able to present that and preserve it. That is a massive opportunity that can be manifested in multiple different ways. So I do believe in that. And whether, how that works with the phone, who knows? But just one really interesting one to me, I was watching, occasionally I still watch 60 Minutes. I know nobody under 50 watches 60 Minutes, but nonetheless, occasionally I watch it. And there was this great episode that was on fairly recently about holographic capture, and I think, and about how it was Holocaust survivors and wanting to capture the stories and the images of people before they passed away. And I certainly do believe that the idea of capturing yourself for your family and, for posterity, and so that your personality is remembered, I think that is going to be a massive business. Yeah. So you can and remember, these are AI driven, so it's not just little speeches. So the way that it's done is that through AI, you're able to have real conversations with whoever it is. So let's say my grandfather, if we're sitting here today, we're able to capture it. Then if he passed away, 5 years from now, he is living in front of me holographically, but it doesn't look like a cheapo hologram. It looks really good. And he's able to have a real conversation, not a canned one with me, or at least something that's seemingly real.
Yeah, fascinating. Now, so that takes me to kind of the whole synthetic media digital avatar thing. So it started with, Tupac was, I think, 2016. Now, Hatsune Miku, which is that Japanese pop star who's an avatar that literally like tens of millions of fans. And one guy married her in like a virtual wedding.
Yeah.
And so you're seeing this thing happen, and where does that go? Because you mentioned, is it Lil Miquela?
Yeah, Lil Miquela, who as of today has something like 2.2 million followers on Instagram.
And what is she? What is that?
So Lil Miquela is for many or most, maybe half, I don't know. Lil Miquela is a virtual being who has a full presence. So a virtual being is not a real human being, but is made to appear that way, has a full backstory, has a full biography, has likes, dislikes, has videos of her interacting in the real world. So you think that it's a real person. It's a virtual being. So it's created to have this full personality, that's her full profile, and now is a massive influencer on Instagram. And so I think for anybody who hasn't checked that out, it's LILMIQUELA, Lil Miquela, and like I said, 2.1 million followers, and she's this is just a wave of the types of things we're going to see going forward. So as an example,
go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, so what happens now with when you combine photorealistic avatars and deep fakes and ownership of your identity?
Well,
how does that play out?
Well, look, first of all, you're going to have Lil Miquela types that are created and will have fleshed out personalities and will have a following organically on their own. And there are many things that can be done with that. So let's, I guess, just spitballing it, thinking about like a Hollywood picture or any kind of thing where now a studio knows that it has a built-in audience for a Lil Miquela a feature starring Lil Miquela, and now you don't have to pay the actor anything. You can control this person, this virtual person, there's no payment involved, and yet you have a big audience, and so you may be able to monetize something. So some would see that as a threat potentially to real live actors.
Yeah, that's been going around since Mickey Mouse, though, right?
No, it has been. But as things become more realistic, then you get into the virtual actors and the virtual beings that way that are, or you could have a Bob Cooney or whoever it may be, Tom Cruise, or where you are licensing your image, and instead of having to act, you're paid your millions of dollars, and you're able to then be in multiple different films and get paid.
In Star Wars, right?
Yeah, exactly right. So who knows what the possibilities are? Some see it as a threat, and some see it as an opportunity.
What happens when somebody creates the virtual, Peter Csathy and starts trotting him out without your authorization at conferences like that? That feels like we're not that far away from that, right?
Well, first of all, I feel I would feel terrible unleashing myself across the world like that. That would be a little scary, even to me. But you're going to see. I think that you're going to like deep fakes, where you have no control over the manipulation of what this person is saying or doing, and we're seeing it so much in politics already, and. You can go down a rabbit hole there that can be really pretty ugly.
Yeah. So the other rabbit hole I want to go down before we run out of time is this notion of the Matrix really is what I'm and so have you followed at all what Facebook is doing with what they call their live maps?
Not really. No.
So what they're doing is they're creating, and they're not the only ones. They're creating kind of a synthetic version of the real world. So with all the AR glasses and cameras that are coming out, they want to map the physical world into a virtual world. And Facebook owns Oculus, and Mark Zuckerberg says he wants 1 billion people in VR. And so how do you feel about the media companies possibly owning the metaverse? So a company that makes all of their money through advertising, now 60-70 billion a year, capturing our attention in something as potentially addicting as VR. What are your thoughts about that? And because that's something that I don't feel enough people are talking about.
Well, look, this is just knee-jerk reaction stuff. I think it's all a matter of degree, in a sense, because you already have Netflix and those that are capturing all of our attention, and we're getting lost in it and spending more and more of our time and giving our data, our usage behavior to this massive company, and they're benefiting from all of that and then making the choices better and better for us, so we're even more hooked. So this is something, it's a tale as old as time. It's just to another degree, now in the metaverse. I do think that this whole, look, not to bash on Facebook, but I'll bash on Facebook. I'm very worried about the collection of all of things that we aren't even aware of. I know I'm aware of it. I'm not nearly close to being aware of it, and how it's being utilized. I have no idea how it's being utilized. But all of that is the privacy issues are real. It's not hysterical to be concerned about them. And clearly that's going to be growing, those privacy concerns. And somehow it's got to come to a head because our data is being monetized. And I don't know if we allow it to happen or if it's just happened or whatever it is. But I think that all of that, and so control in that world, manipulation of reality, but not in an entertainment sense, but steering us toward certain behaviors is of real concern.
Well, and marketers, look, I'm a marketer. Marketers have been doing that since the beginning of time too.
Well,
we manipulate people that want products that we don't need to buy products, and that's
totally. Fair enough.
I think it's a function of awareness, though, as you pointed out, is the value exchange isn't necessarily clear between the information that we're giving and what's being done with it versus what we get in return. Well, we know what we get in return, but yeah.
Well, and also I think that the line between what is true or accurate and not true and accurate has been sliding further and further, and we see it in our politics. Obviously, we see that all the time. That to me is a massive societal concern.
Yeah. So somebody was asking Tigger Baugust, I love reading trying to read people's handles on Twitch, was asking the best place to I should be getting all of the questions no matter what platform you're watching on. If you are watching from my Facebook VR mentoring group, just put your name in the comment because for some reason the names don't come through on that. But somebody was talking about a documentary, which I haven't seen, but I'll watch. Dr. Jordan Wynn did a documentary called Meet the Avatars on Catalyst on ABC. And I'm finding the avatar thing and the whole digital human thing to be fascinating. And I think we're all going to have, like we've already been doing it with Bitmoji and stuff like that. It's already been moving in that direction. And as they become more and more realistic, I'm going to find that to be interesting. What about remember Bandersnatch on Netflix?
Yeah, of course.
That interactive. We haven't heard anything about that other than supposedly they were going to do more of them. Are you seeing anything around that interactivity and storytelling happening in the media world?
Yeah, completely. You're seeing a lot in the, I guess, smaller platforms where you are able to interact and change the direction. I think that like Yarn, which is a small it's a female-focused text-based narrative service that does surprisingly well through subscriptions for, caters to, teens, females primarily. Those are serialized stories where you can actually interact with those stories, and that I'm quite sure it changes the direction of where that story goes. Certainly, like the Bandersnatch thing, that was it was more of a marketing play, but it was a grand experiment, and there will be more and more of it. People have been talking about interactivity for a long, long time. I don't think anybody's hit it out of the park yet because of the technology to do that, and also just the cost involved in creating all these different threads. But all of that is because, as we know, just with technology and content creation, those costs are coming way, way down. Yeah. And synthetic media may be able to make it even more cost effective to create all these different branches. So yeah, I think there's going to be, just like in a video game, interactivity where you can change the storyline for a game. You're going to have active entertainment like that, and then more passive entertainment like when we sit back and we just want to have a story revealed to us. I believe there's going to be room for all of that.
Yeah, cool. Well, we are about out of time. I've only got 15 more questions, but I'm going to hold them for another opportunity. Have him back to talk about more stuff. So we might have to. We might have to do this again.
Bob, I really love it, and I enjoy your work a lot. Like I was telling you before the call, I learn a lot from what you know and the worlds that you're in. And to the audience, I had no idea that this young man who I'm in front of is in Australia right now. So,
yeah, live from Melbourne, Australia for now on lockdown.
Yes,
Peter, you're coming to us from LA?
San Diego.
San Diego, beautiful.
Yeah.
And where in San Diego are you?
Rancho Santa Fe.
Okay.
Which is North County.
Awesome. Yeah. I'm looking forward to getting back there and getting in the water and getting some surfing.
Yeah. By the way, just if you have a moment, just one amazing thing. We had the red tide phenomenon for the last weeks. And it is, for those of you, if you go online, check out red tide. In the nighttime, the waves crash and the luminescence, it looks like that it's a fluorescent blue. It's amazing.
Somebody sent me, I'll post it on my social feed. So somebody sent me a video of somebody surfing at night. Yeah. On the bioluminescent tide, and it was mind blowing. And so
it's mind blowing.
It's the big. I've saw some small ones. I've never seen anything like that.
It blew my mind when my kids were telling me, "Dad, you got to go out there." I was saying, "Yeah, you know what? I'm sure it's cool," but it was It was one of the most amazing natural phenomena I've ever experienced in my life. It's that amazing.
Yeah, the planet's healing itself and thanking us maybe for locking down, and maybe that's a subtle way for saying, stay at home.
I believe that there's a reset.
Yeah. It was interesting. Dave Snowden, who I interviewed last week for the Friday show, was talking about, he thinks that this is the chance for us to do a reset, and he called it purgatory, a chance to redeem ourselves. And I think VR stuff and some of this virtual stuff that's happening. The reason I'm so excited about it is that it's accelerating all of the the implementation of the virtual technologies that are enabling us to be more efficient and to do things in a better way and reduce traffic and reduce pollution and reduce, usage. And I hope that we do a good enough job of creating these experiences that grab people so people see the good parts of it and they don't just think, oh, it's Zoom. Because after a while, people are already getting tired of Zoom.
Yeah.
And we need to find better ways of engaging online so we keep doing it when we're allowed out of our homes. Otherwise, we just go right back to the old normal, and that's going to suck.
Well, one great way to make Zoom more engaging is have your virtual happy hours and add some. It's Cinco de Mayo, so as I told you, that's what I'm going to be doing, but not Zoom. But just a couple things that in your world that you're really deep in that I find to be amazing, and maybe people don't think about them that much. But imagine that if you're an invalid or an elderly person who's in a adult care facility and you have no mobility, if you're able to travel to other parts of the world and immerse yourself, and your body physiologically believes that it's there, so your mind, like, that's a beautiful thing. Or imagine if you're a burn victim and you're immersed in a world of snow, and those kind of therapies, and the reduction of pain is the same as opiates. Like that's incredible, amazing, mind-blowing stuff. That's happening now, and it's going to be accelerating because of what we're seeing.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Peter, for joining. Check out Peter's website, creative.media. Get his book, Viral Media Entertainment in the Age of the Great Pandemic. Follow him on social media, especially on LinkedIn. Peter, I really thank you so much. I can't wait to see you again in person, and maybe we'll do another one of these in the future.
Bob, I really enjoyed it. It's great to be here.
Thank you, everybody, for joining. We'll see you Friday when we talk deeper about the Metaverse. Online Friday. Happy Cinco de Mayo.